You spent all day organizing your tasks, adjusting your tools, and researching, yet you haven't made a single offer. You're confusing activity with progress, hiding in busy work to avoid the tasks that actually make money. I know the look of that desk. Impeccable, perhaps even minimal. The digital architecture of your life is flawless. The calendar color-coded, the Notion dashboard a masterpiece of cross-referencing, the email inbox hovering at 0. You feel the dull ache behind your eyes, the heavy fatigue of having pushed a massive, invisible boulder uphill. You tell yourself with a conviction that borders on desperate prayer that this exhaustion is proof of productivity. But the ledger does not lie. The bank account remains a barren landscape, indifferent to the elegance of your Gantt charts. This is the cold, sharp contradiction that haunts the ambitious soul, the overwhelming sense of having labored without having created value. You have mastered the sterile ritual of preparation, yet you refuse to step onto the stage. You are not procrastinating in the traditional sense, slumped on the couch consuming digital junk food. No, your failure is far more insidious. You are engaged in active procrastination, constructing an elaborate, high-friction distraction that feels, smells, and tastes exactly like real work. Let us be surgically precise about this self-deception. The tasks you prioritize are defensive in nature. They are the maintenance of the mental scaffolding, not the construction of the cathedral itself. You spend 3 hours perfecting the internal standard operating procedure, SOP, for a process you haven't even executed yet. You research the optimal marketing software stack for the 10th time, comparing features that are statistically irrelevant to your current scale. You are refining the map while refusing to take the journey. This is not a failure of discipline. It is a sophisticated protocol of avoidance. The root is fear, a cold, subterranean dread of exposure. The tasks that generate revenue, the direct pitch, the vulnerable creation of original content, the negotiation of a high-stakes contract, these are the tasks that invite external judgment. They carry the genuine risk of rejection, ridicule, or financial failure. The market is a brutal, objective mirror, and most of us prefer the comforting, subjective fog of internal organization. The brain, in its cynical wisdom, is remarkably efficient at protecting us from perceived emotional injury.
Rejection, in the deep wiring of the limbic system, registers as a genuine threat to social standing, echoing ancient fears of expulsion from the tribe. Yorinchakte, architecture mentale, is prioritizing safety over success. Think of the neurochemical payoff. When you complete a difficult, high-value sales call that results in a clear no, the emotional cost is high, and the immediate dopamine reward is negligible. You have to process the failure and iterate.
Conversely, when you spend an hour organizing your cloud storage, you receive a clean, immediate, low-stakes hit of dopamine for completion. You successfully optimized a small, controllable system. Your brain becomes addicted to this cheap currency. It conflates the feeling of being organized with the state of being productive. You are substituting the satisfying click of filing a document for the terrifying vulnerability of asking for money. The vast majority of your day is spent in the low-friction domain of administrative maneuvering because the high-friction domain of commercial exposure is perceived as a psychological hazard. We must understand that this is not laziness. This is sophisticated inertia, disguised as meticulousness. I observed this pattern meticulously in a client, a man named Sterling, a talented architect operating out of Brooklyn. Sterling had the genius to design breathtaking residential spaces, but his business was perpetually stagnant. His office was a monument to potential. Every drawing board was calibrated, every digital file named with rigorous precision, every vendor contact cataloged and rated. He spent 40 hours a week managing the infrastructure of a firm that barely existed. His main task, the high-leverage activity that would generate 6 figures, was making personalized outreach calls to high-net-worth developers. The money task. Sterling would routinely schedule this task for 9 a.m. But by 8:55 a.m., the subtle shift in his internal landscape would begin. I can't call them without the updated portfolio PDF, he would rationalize. The branding isn't quite congruent yet. Suddenly, the minor task of adjusting the font kerning on page 12 of the firm's digital brochure became an urgent, mission-critical deployment. He would lose 4 hours in the labyrinth of design software, achieving a microscopic improvement that no client would ever notice, but which provided a massive psychological blindagem against the possibility of a developer saying, "Your design is too expensive," or "I prefer the competition." Sterling was exhausted by 1 p.m., having wrestled with vectors and PDFs, convinced he had done the hardest part of the day. He had indeed labored, but only against his own internal resistance, not against the actual friction of the market. His exhaustion was not the residue of battle, it was the fatigue of constant psychological defense. This mechanism is amplified in the modern digital economy. We are inundated with tools designed to optimize, but optimization only matters if you are optimizing high-value outputs. If you spend 8 hours optimizing the delivery of a zero-value output, you have achieved nothing more than high-speed failure. The core issue is a lack of congruence. Between your declared ambition, financial success, market impact, and your operational reality, prioritizing self-soothing administrative tasks. You are performing the role of the successful entrepreneur, the organization, the early mornings, the planning, but you are avoiding the existential action that defines that role. We must confront the dopaminergic hijack. The brain loves checklists. Every completed task, no matter how trivial, cleaned desk, filed invoices, read article on optimizing workflow, provides a measurable, verifiable reduction in cognitive load, triggering a reward signal. The crucial difference is that these tasks have a low cost of failure. If you fail to file an invoice correctly, the consequence is minor. If you fail to land a major contract, the consequence is existential. Your subconscious mind, guided by the ancient survival mechanisms, steers you toward the predictable low-stakes rewards. This is the neuroscientific explanation for the full calendar and the empty account. You are trading long-term, high-reward, high-risk endeavors for short-term, low-reward, no-risk psychological comfort. The shadow mentor must insist on clarity. Your productivity is an illusion. It is a carefully constructed theatrical performance designed to satisfy your internal censor while keeping you safely insulated from the messy, painful reality of commerce. To break this cycle, we must first accept the fundamental premise. The most important task is the one you are most afraid to start. The fear is the signal. If a task feels terrifying, if it carries the genuine potential for public failure or significant rejection, that task is almost certainly the highest leverage activity on your list. Your subconscious has correctly identified it as the gateway to change, and thus it has employed the most elaborate psychological defenses, the busy work, to keep you away from it. We need to reverse the flow of the protocol. Instead of allowing the fear of rejection to drive you into the administrative cave, we must use the administrative tasks as the reward for confronting rejection. Consider the true cost of this avoidance. It is not merely financial. It is the steady erosion of self-trust. Every time you prioritize the trivial over the essential, you send a clear, damaging message to your own system. I am not trustworthy with high-stakes endeavors. This internal dissonance, the gap between the person you claim to be and the tasks you actually execute, is the source of a deep, pervasive anxiety that no amount of desk organization can soothe. You are exhausted because you are constantly fighting yourself. The friction is internal, not external. The market is waiting, indifferent. It demands action, not preparation. It requires exposure, not meticulous planning. The sterile perfection of your workflow is merely a mausoleum for your potential. The solution, then, is not to simply work harder, a meaningless exhortation, but to surgically identify and dismantle the psychological shield of active procrastination. This requires a cold, analytical triage of your daily schedule, filtering tasks not by effort, but by potential for external rejection. We must stop worshiping at the altar of efficiency and start prioritizing effectiveness, even if that effectiveness feels messy, uncomfortable, and potentially humiliating. The first step in any genuine protocol, must be the ruthless identification of the money task, that one activity which, if completed, disproportionately moves the financial needle. For Sterling, it was the personalized outreach. For the aspiring author, it is the submission of the manuscript. For the consultant, it is the pricing and presentation of the premium offer. These tasks require vulnerability, and vulnerability is terrifying. But the comfort you find in your administrative perfection is not sustainable. It is merely the quiet complacency of stagnation. We must inject a necessary dose of manageable chaos into the system. The feeling of overwhelming exhaustion you carry at the end of the day is not the signal of a successful day's work. It is the physical manifestation of sustained internal conflict. You have spent 8 hours arguing with your own subconscious about the necessity of exposure. The real work, the work that pays, would likely take only 2 hours. But those 2 hours demand the full, terrifying engagement of your authentic self, ready to accept the market's verdict. We are going to dismantle this defense mechanism by leveraging the very neurochemical processes that currently imprison you. We will use the brain's craving for structure and completion, but redirect that energy toward tasks that carry the highest risk and, consequently, the highest reward. The shift must be from the satisfaction of managing complexity to the satisfaction of conquering external friction. This requires a deliberate, almost ritualistic exposure to the painful reality of potential rejection. You need to gather data on what the market actually thinks of your value, not what your perfectly organized spreadsheet predicts. The administrative labyrinth, the perfect scheduling tool, the endless research. These are not tools of success. They are sophisticated weapons of self-sabotage, wielded by a part of your mind desperate to avoid the painful truth that growth requires vulnerability, and that value is measured externally, not by the cleanliness of your internal systems. We must now turn our attention to the precise methodology for initiating high-friction tasks, bypassing the brain's natural inclination toward low-friction distraction. This is where the concept of the first 5 minutes protocol becomes essential. The first 5 minutes protocol is not a motivational trick. It is a neurological bypass operation, designed to circumvent the executive function's inherent cowardice when faced with genuine risk. You sit there staring at the critical task, the presentation that defines your value, the outreach email to the whale client, the difficult conversation with the partner. Your architecture mental immediately registers this task as high friction. It requires exposure, and exposure risks pain. Pain means energy expenditure. The subconscious, operating on the primal economy of conservation, immediately diverts resources. This is the genesis of active procrastination. The sudden overwhelming urge to alphabetize your digital files, check for software updates, or meticulously color code your calendar for the next fiscal quarter. These tasks are low friction. They offer instant, measurable completion, and they flood your system with microdoses of dopamine that temporarily satisfy the brain's craving for structure, while successfully preserving your psychological blindagem against external judgment. The resulting state is a catastrophic form of inertia. You are not resting, you are stuck in motion, a frenetic, exhausting, but utterly irrelevant spin cycle. The engine is running, the gas tank is draining, but the car is suspended on blocks. The protocol functions by acknowledging the reality of this neurological resistance rather than trying to overpower it with willpower, a resource that is volatile and easily depleted. The goal is simple: reduce the activation energy required to such a minuscule level that the brain cannot justify the administrative detour. For Sterling, whose high-friction task was the personalized high-stakes outreach, the protocol required him to sit down and, without checking email, without reading news, without so much as optimizing the font size, draft the opening salutation and the first 2 lines of the value proposition. Only the first 2 lines. The critical constraint here is time and scope. You are not permitted to complete the task, only to initiate it for a maximum of 5 minutes. Why 5 minutes? Because the highest point of resistance, the psychological mountain range, occurs at the moment of initiation. Once the wheels are turning, even slowly, the brain's inertia shifts from avoidance to continuation. This is a fundamental principle of behavioral neurobiology. Motion creates the illusion of momentum, and the brain prefers to follow an existing vector, even if that vector was initially painful to establish. The fear response, mediated by the amygdala, is designed to spike sharply when confronted with novel threats. By committing only to 5 minutes, you offer the amygdala a guarantee. This pain is time-boxed. We will evaluate the threat, gather initial data, and then cease activity. This promise lowers the perceived catastrophic risk of the endeavor. The most common trap the sophisticated procrastinator falls into is demanding perfection from the outset. You tell yourself, I must start this document only when I have all the data, the perfect title, and 3 hours of uninterrupted time. This demand for environmental and intellectual sterility is the ultimate weapon of delay. It is a lie. The market does not reward perfection. It rewards presence. The first 5 minutes protocol strips away the illusion of preparation. It dictates that the task must be started in its messiest, most rudimentary form. The 2 lines Sterling wrote were ugly, probably grammatically flawed, and certainly lacked the polished veneer of his usual administrative work. But they existed. They were externalized data points, no longer trapped in the realm of potential. The immediate neurochemical reward is subtle but profound. You do not get the rush of clearing an inbox, pseudo-completion, but you gain the quiet, steel-cold satisfaction of genuine efficacy. You have done the hard thing. You have confronted the void. This small, authentic victory begins the critical process of rebuilding. Congruence between your stated identity and your executed reality. The exhaustion you felt previously was the result of internal war, the self fighting the self. The 5-minute exposure, though uncomfortable, replaces internal friction with external friction. Now the battle is with the market, which is predictable and indifferent, rather than with your own treacherous subconscious. We need to treat these high-friction tasks as exposure therapy. You are systematically desensitizing your fear response to rejection. Think of the task not as closing the deal or submitting the book, but merely as generating external data. The market's response, whether enthusiastic acceptance or cold silence, is irrelevant to the success of the protocol itself. The success lies solely in the execution of the 5 minutes. This surgical approach bypasses the brain's tendency toward global avoidance. The brain sees the entire project, writing the 300-page novel, and shuts down. The protocol forces it to see only the smallest achievable unit of pain, the first sentence. The true measure of your daily productivity must shift from the volume of completed low-friction tasks, clearing emails, to the sheer number of high-friction tasks initiated, regardless of their immediate outcome. You must accept that this process will feel awkward, inefficient, and often humiliating. You are deliberately trading the clean, controlled environment of your administrative cave for the messy, unpredictable reality of the external world. You are choosing the path of Viktor Frankl, finding meaning in the inevitable suffering and confrontation required for growth, rather than the hedonistic comfort of superficial busyness. But how do you ensure compliance? How do you prevent the mind from defaulting back into the familiar, comforting pattern of checking the news or optimizing a spreadsheet when the 5 minutes are up and the fear returns? This is where the concept of the reward reversal is integrated into the larger protocol. Your brain currently uses administrative tasks, low friction, high dopamine, as the reward for avoiding the high friction task. We must flip this Pavlovian conditioning. The administrative tasks, the joy of a clean inbox, the satisfaction of an organized desk, the comfort of detailed planning, must become the consequence of successfully initiating the high-friction task. You are not allowed to touch the email inbox, respond to trivial Slack messages, or organize your notes until the 5 minutes of high-stakes exposure have been completed. The cleaning, the organizing, the preparation, these are no longer prerequisites for the real work. They are the luxurious, low-stakes cool-down period earned through genuine confrontation. The psychological power of this reversal is immense. It leverages the brain's existing craving for structure and completion, but directs that craving toward productive ends. The subconscious mind, seeking the soothing reward of order, learns that the fastest path to that reward is through the uncomfortable gateway of external action. This is the process of deliberately dismantling the psychological shield. We are using the comfort tasks as bait. Consider the neurochemical cascade. Initiating the high-friction task, exposure, requires a deliberate push against resistance, building self-trust and efficacy, PFC activation. Completing the required 5 minutes provides a small, authentic surge of dopamine linked to genuine achievement. The subsequent low-friction task, clearing the inbox, then provides a secondary, satisfying hit of dopamine linked to immediate, easy completion. The brain begins to associate the initial discomfort, exposure, not with pain, but with the necessary precursor to structured reward. You are retraining your system to crave the friction because the friction is the only path to the predictable, calming order you truly desire. This requires brutal honesty and task identification. You must maintain a relentless triage of your daily activities, filtering everything through one chilling question. Does completing this task expose me to the risk of external rejection, or does it merely insulate me from it? If the task is purely internal, if its success can only be judged by you, it is probably a comfort task, and it must be deferred until the protocol has been satisfied. If you find yourself spending an entire morning designing the perfect slide deck template before writing a single word of the content, you have fallen back into the trap. You are worshiping the vessel, not the contents. The problem with active procrastination is its insidious elegance. It masks stagnation as discipline. It allows you to feel busy, even exhausted, while ensuring zero financial or professional growth. The protocol is the antidote to this self-deception. It forces measurable, externally facing action. It demands data. And data, no matter how harsh, is always superior to the suffocating silence of potential. The next phase requires us to look at the sustained execution of this protocol, how to build the blindagem necessary to handle the inevitable rejection that follows exposure, transforming fear into fuel, and understanding that the market's no is not a verdict on your worth, but merely a calibration point for your approach. You must learn to harvest the data from rejection itself. The protocol works only if you believe the external world is a laboratory, not a courtroom. You have successfully dismantled the initial scaffolding of active procrastination, that intricate self-constructed cage of administrative comfort. You have forced the 5 minutes of high-stakes exposure. You have sent the email, made the call, published the draft, or submitted the proposal that carries the genuine risk of being ignored, dismissed, or outright ridiculed. And now, the inevitable. The market, that cold, indifferent monolith, responds. It responds with silence. It responds with the generic, polite refusal. It responds with the brutal, targeted critique. This is the point where most individuals, having briefly stepped outside the comfort of their meticulously organized architecture mental, immediately retreat. They interpret the market's friction as proof of their inherent inadequacy, rather than viewing it as a simple, necessary thermodynamic consequence of doing real work. They mistake the rejection of a proposal for the rejection of their self. The dopamine hit associated with the completion of the low-friction tasks, the clean inbox, the perfectly formatted report, is predictable, gentle, and internally validated. The dopamine associated with genuine, externally facing achievement is volatile, often preceded by cortisol, and entirely dependent on factors outside your control. When the external world delivers a no, the entire system crashes. The mind screams for the immediate, soothing inertia of administration, urging you back into the safety of meaningless busyness. This is the final barrier, the blindagem. The blindagem is not a mystical shield of indifference. It is a meticulously constructed neurocognitive filtration system designed to process external negativity without permitting existential contamination. You must understand, with the surgical clarity of a neuroscientist observing a panicked amygdala, that the pain of rejection is not a moral verdict. It is merely a neurochemical event. When a client dismisses your pitch or an editor rejects your manuscript, your brain registers this external social pain in circuits overlapping those that process physical injury, specifically the anterior cingulate cortex. You feel shame, embarrassment, and a profound urge to hide. The old response was immediate self-flagellation and retreat into the illusion of productivity, re-optimizing the website font for 3 hours. The protocol must now integrate the blindagem, the cognitive override managed by the prefrontal cortex, PFC. Your task post-rejection is not to mourn, but to execute the data harvesting protocol. The market's no is not a reflection of your intrinsic worth. It is merely an indicator that the delivery mechanism was flawed, the timing was incorrect, or the recipient was misidentified. This data is priceless. It is the only metric that truly matters. Jordan Peterson speaks of accepting the terrible responsibility of existence as the antidote to chaos. Here, the responsibility is to the data. You are responsible for extracting the measurable, actionable intelligence from the failure, stripping away the emotional residue like peeling varnish from fine wood. Ask only these questions. 1. What specific element of the external action triggered the negative response? Was it the price, the framing, the lack of context? 2. Was the rejection specific to the outcome, or was it a non-specific response to the discomfort of exposure itself? Did they reject the contract, or did they reject the conversation? 3. What is the smallest, most immediate adjustment required for the next exposure attempt? If you spend more than 5 minutes processing the feeling of rejection, you have failed the blindagem protocol. The only acceptable response to external friction is immediate surgical calibration and re-exposure. The administrative tasks, the sweet, low-friction comfort you crave, are now strategically deployed. You use them not as an escape, but as a deliberate emotional palate cleanser, earned only after the data harvesting protocol is complete and the next high-friction action is scheduled. You are training your nervous system to associate the sting of rejection not with finality, but with the necessary precursor to refinement. The shame impulse is intercepted and redirected into analytical energy. I watch people, intelligent, driven individuals, who spend their lives perfecting their internal systems, designing the ideal Notion template, reading the 30th book on time management, or endless A/B testing the subject lines of emails they haven't written yet. They are worshiping the preparation, terrified of the performance. They are mistaking the meticulous organization of their potential for the manifestation of their output. They are exhausted, but solvent only in potential. The blindagem forces a brutal congruence between effort and consequence. When you are truly engaged in high-friction work, the exhaustion you feel at the end of the day is fundamentally different from the exhaustion of active procrastination. The fake work exhaustion, that dull, heavy fatigue that leaves you busy but empty, is the result of sustained anxiety and the dopamine depletion from low-value, high-frequency stimulation. It is the exhaustion of fighting an internal battle against reality. The exhaustion of genuine high-friction work is clean. It is the profound, metallic fatigue of a muscle pushed to its limit. It carries the weight of genuine impact. You are tired because you confronted the market, extracted the data, and built something that required you to risk social capital. This exhaustion is corrosive to self-deception and generative of actual value. The ultimate measure of success, the final endpoint of this journey, is not the bank balance itself, but the undeniable psychological shift in your relationship with external confrontation. You will stop seeking guaranteed success and start prioritizing maximum clarity. You realize that a definitive no is infinitely more valuable than the suffocating silence of potential. The no provides the coordinates necessary for the next iteration. It prevents the slow, agonizing death by 1,000 administrative cuts. The man who fears the market's no will never know what his time is truly worth. He will perpetually discount his value, not in dollars, but in the psychological currency of avoidance. He will fill his days with the illusion of control, the perfect spreadsheet, the optimized calendar, while his life drifts on the tide of external events he is too afraid to influence. The mentor sombrio does not promise ease. I promise necessary difficulty. The world outside your administrative cave is chaotic, demanding, and frequently unkind. But it is the only place where value is measured and validated. You must accept the truth that you are not paid for the time you spend organizing your desk. You are paid for the friction you absorb on behalf of the market. You are paid for the risks you take that others avoid. Sustain the protocol. Maintain the blindagem. Harvest the data. When you look at your calendar now, it should no longer be a monument to internal preparation, but a ledger of external confrontation. The email inbox, once a demanding master, is now merely a task queue, a low-stakes reward earned only after the high-friction battle is won. The exhaustion remains, yes, but it is the exhaustion of the soldier who has returned from the field, not the exhaustion of the prisoner pacing his cell. And slowly, inevitably, you will notice the profound, undeniable shift. The number on the bank statement will begin, finally, to reflect the genuine, hard-won output of your days, replacing the phantom productivity of the past with the cold, hard logic of earned solvency. You are no longer merely busy, you are effective. And that, in the severe calculus of genuine achievement, is the only metric that survives the audit.